talked quite rightly about how the cost of inaction is a lot more expensive than the cost of action. But there's a £3 million retrofit projects in the climate budget that could be ready for immediate investment in the unfunded tables. You could have used business rates for that. So when will the cost of action become more important than the cost of inaction?
So the examples of the cost of action, I'm not aware of the particular thing. I'm more than happy to look into that afterwards, by the way. The examples of cost of action is the money we're investing in the Green Finance Fund, in the Warmer Homes London Fund, in community energy, in the Green Routes Fund. We're criticised by some on the Assembly for investing so much on those areas, but I believe we've got to do so. That's the cost of action. We're also, by the way, lobbying the government for some further support towards public decarbonisation, and the additional funds announced recently by Ed Miliband as part of the national pot, where we bid in for that as well.
And would you be able to write to me about these specific ones? Obviously, my office can let you know exactly which ones.
Chair, I'd be really keen to do so.
Perfect. And then finally, I don't know if you saw Tom Edwards had a report on the BBC around food waste. They showed lots of councils aren't even giving the information about whether they're collecting food waste or not. Read London, I don't know if they have the information or the Deputy Mayor has the information, but it feels like the very first thing we need to start with is some information before we work out how we can better collect food waste.
So, I mean, this has been a challenge over the last 10 years. I mean, every borough, most boroughs have different, policies. That's one of the joys of local democracy. I suspect once we have the May the 7th elections out of the way, we'll have a chance to have proper conversation with all the councils about this going forward, because it is a challenge. The Deputy Mayor's worked incredibly hard to try and get, try and convene the various councils forward, and Senator Cooper has been an ally over the last 10 years in this area as well. I think over the next few weeks it may be difficult, but we'll make sure we, make real progress from May onwards. It is an issue that's got to be addressed.
And can I check my assumption that Read London have a big part to play in that?
We work with a number of colleagues across and organisations across London who've been really good, but are also frustrated by the differences from borough to borough, which is it's really difficult if you move. And in London, because of our transient nature of our population, they move quite often from borough A to borough B to borough C in the course of a couple of years, and it's very difficult. Add to that number of flats. There are challenges, but they're not insurmountable, I don't think. You can look at other cities. They managed to do it across the globe, and I think we've got to work better with the councils to do that. And that means that the councils are also working with us, but we're really keen to work with them.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair.
Assembly Member Small-Edwards.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, for me, the housing crisis is the biggest issue we face. So how is your budget helping to address London's housing crisis?
I agree with you. I think it's the number one challenge facing our city. It's a consequence of supply not meeting demand for decades. It's also a consequence of people wanting to come to this great city. Growth is not a problem. You've got to plan for that growth. So the good news is we've shown from our track records broken in terms of council homes built, in terms of homes completed. But as I said, there is a perfect storm in the housing market. So a number of things this budget does to address this crisis. The government has given us the longest and the biggest housing settlement since records began, north of £11 billion over 10 years in the Social and Affordable Homes Programme. That will give confidence to developers and councils that there's a certainty over the next 10 years. We now have a City Hall Developer Investment Fund backed up with £2 billion from the government. We can support development in terms of grants and loans. We're investing record sums in rough sleeping, really important. We've increased fivefold the amount invested in rough sleeping. Additional money set aside today, as well as in the draft budget as well. We've also consulted and we've set out now how we're going to give homes to key workers, really important in London, rent-controlled homes for those. The two new towns the Chair mentioned in his opening will be really important, one in Enfield, which is really important, which I know is really welcomed by all members of the Assembly. We've also working on a streamlined London plan to fast-track progress going forward. And, of course, the MDOs that I talked about are really important, and the new calling power. So we've got the government working with us, and to be fair, developers keen to work with us because they don't want to see sites not making progress. The building safety regulators ready to deal with the backlogs being curtailed. So I'm hopeful this year you will see progress made that we've not seen over the since the pandemic in terms of new homes started and completed.
Thank you for that response, Mr Mayor. And a massive issue in my constituency is rough sleeping. Your budget allocates an additional £8 million towards rough sleeping. How far will this go in terms of meeting your pledge to end rough sleeping in London by 2030?
So to give the member an idea of context, when I first became mayor, the annual budget for addressing rough sleeping, annual budget was £8.5 million. Before this year's budget, it was more than £44.5 million. We've increased fivefold the amount of money to address rough sleeping, and that's one of the reasons why we've taken 20,000 rough sleepers off our streets. More than 3/4 have stayed off our streets, which is fantastic. And the issue is more and more new rough sleepers are coming to the streets of London, some from around the country, some from London. So we published last year, as part of my ambition to get us to end rough sleeping by the end of this decade, a plan of action. And so this additional £8 million I've announced today, which is on top of the investment I announced in the draft plan, will help us meet that objective, carry through some of the things in the new plan of action, target this funding, and I'm really keen to do with the issue of prevention. It can't be right that monies only flow when somebody's verified as being bedded on the street for a night. Surely it's far better to try and support them before when they're at risk of becoming a rough sleeper. So working with great councils, great voluntary sector, great experts, we're going to make more progress this year to try and reduce rough sleeping, but also those who are sleeping roughs, get them off our streets for good.
Mr Mayor, your budget also allocates £3 million for supporting tenants. How would that money be used?
So one of the things that I really welcome is in the new Renters' Rights Act, giving tenants more rights than they hitherto had. So, for example, if a tenant complains about damp and mould, a landlord can't serve a Section 1 eviction, no-fault eviction notice to them. So tenant will have more confidence in terms of reporting housing conditions, but also there are obligations on landlords, private landlords and social landlords. One of the things we've seen in the past is, for example, damp and mould sensors, which automates if a home's got damp and mould, which means that council knows or a landlord knows there's an issue and action can be taken. And you know the consequences of damp and mould from the awful case of Awab Hassan in Rochdale. So we're looking at issues like that. Can we scale up the issue of damp and mould sensors? What can we do to help tenants in terms of them using the rights they've got under the new Renters' Rights Act, but also to improve the condition of housing they're living in?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And finally, you mentioned in your initial answer the large increase that the government have provided in terms of affordable homes funding and the length of that funding. Do you think that will help address one of the issues we're facing in terms of a slowdown of housing starts?
Well, it's really important to give certainty to this market, and this market's been on a roller coaster over the last 10 years, the housing market. And I appreciate the counter-cyclical nature of housing, but we need some calm. But also, you've got to encourage somebody to train or retrain to be a builder. They're not unreasonable to know there's work going forward. And so that twinned with the fact that we know councils and registered social landlords have got real financial problems, providing the certainty in relation to rent convergence, in relation to the rent cap, in relation to a 10-year, £11.7 billion package of support is really important. And so we welcome that, not just in terms of the reasons I've set out, but also it means that we can plan in terms of avoiding the lumpiness that's been mentioned in the past. We can have some certainty going forward in terms of the new homes being built. And what I really welcome about the monies the government's allocate to London is they're quite clear they want this money to be used for affordable and council homes, which is really important.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, you chose not to reinvest savings from the government's extension of free school meals into helping councils address holiday hunger or wider child poverty pressures. Do you genuinely believe those pressures are already fully covered? And if so, on what evidence from councils? Sutton Council, for example, are having to find money from their own budget. They've seen the gap. They just don't want to see any child go hungry in the holidays.
I thank the member for her question. Clearly, it's a passion of mine to address the issue of social injustice in our city. One of the reasons why we've introduced universal free school meals during term time is to address that issue. It's also one of the reasons why I'm the first mayor to have a holiday hope fund in terms of working with great groups like Felix, but also the Mayor's Fund for London, who do great work in relation to this. So there is I think in this year's budget, at least £2 million set aside for this, working with great community groups. Also, it's worth reminding the member that £50 million is going towards helping young Londoners. Some of that money will be working with young Londoners during
And
the
yet
holiday.
councils are still having to find the money to support children. It's not covering everything.
Oh, I don't want you to tell Lib Dem Sutton Council how to do their job, but spend your money properly is one thing they could do. But good councils are working with difficult circumstances because they've had big cuts over the last 14 years, not least the first 5 years of the previous decade under the coalition government.
We don't need to.
We're doing what we can. She doesn't talk about. She just said, "I don't want to talk about the coalition government."
No. We know what you're doing.
Why.
We know what you're doing.
We know why.
We know what you're doing.
And that's one of the reasons why we're stepping in. We're stepping in because we recognise.
You're not. You're actually not. You're not. That's the
recognise.
evidence, and you're not basing anything on evidence. Mr. Mayor, I'm going to move on to another very serious topic. It is Ramadan, and it's one of the holiest months. And during this month, we've seen a horrific incident at Manchester Central Mosque. Are you confident that your support for the security of mosques here in London is adequate? And do you think it's really now time to seriously consider making sure there's explicit Islamophobia training across the GLA?
Well, in terms of the budget, I can talk about what we're doing in terms of this area, but I can talk generally if the chair, if you allow me to. I'm happy. I'm in your hands. Thank you. So I take the issue of not just London being the greatest city in the world to live in, but also a city where everyone is not just tolerated, but respected, embraced, and celebrated. I'm criticised for doing so, by the way, by some in this assembly and for investing in some of the things that we invest in, like loved and wanted. I spent a lot of yesterday. Making sure that we were doing all we can, speaking to not just the synagogues and the mosques, but other worship places as well, because everyone feels the ripples of hate from the attempted attack in Manchester. We've got to be careful what we say about that incident for obvious reasons, because there's a live investigation.
I just want to know, do you think it's adequate?
place.
Do we need to do better?
And, well, I'm the mayor that's talked openly about the need for there to be training. Some members on this assembly don't want their staff trained when it comes to issues around anti-racism. I think it's really important for us to receive that sort of training. The Met Police, for example, has said publicly they want to be an anti-racist organisation. Really important when it comes to dealing with issues of anti-Muslim hatred.
I think the community wants to see more, though. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And I was recently at the launch
I'll leave
of.
it there.
I'm surprised she wasn't there. I was recently at the launch of the British Muslim Trust. I'm disappointed she wasn't there. But had she been there, I thought the member cared about this. I thought she cared about this. She clearly doesn't.
Okay.